Lesson 6, Going Inside and Trusting Myself. For most of my life, religion told me not to trust myself, especially my feelings. We were taught what to believe based on the accepted belief systems, and then we were encouraged to trust that we were correct even when it didn't feel quite right. The reason for this was the base reasoning that the body and our feelings were inherently flawed because of sin. This ignorance led to several unhealthy results, including shame and other toxic beliefs. We prayed for miracles to happen to our bodies instead of tending to them. We missed all the messages our body was trying to give us, hoping for a supernatural intervention. We thought the answers were out there somewhere, and we didn't know how to look inside. Even though we knew our bodies healed themselves, we didn't trust anything inside because we were convinced that all of it was bad. This toxicity affects every area of our life. When we believe there is nothing good in us, we miss the good things we could experience and we heap more shame onto our already traumatized existence. We carry the wounds from ourselves and others and feel the only answer is to beg God to take it away. In this type of belief system, how could we ever imagine we could be a part of the solution? Recently, I've discovered that my old belief system was misguided. By addressing my trauma and going within, I find healing not from a magical external source, but from somewhere inside me. My body gave me clues and tried to tell me what was wrong and how to improve. But because I ignored it, looking for an easy solution, it only worsened because the remedy was ineffective. The shadow got more prominent, the trauma drove itself deeper, and it caused more significant issues, including physical, emotional, and psychological symptoms. Jesus hinted at this when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you." This passage emphasizes that we don't need to look for it elsewhere if the kingdom of God is as close as the cells of our body. The divine is present in our brain cells, heart cells, and every blood and oxygen molecule that flows through our body. This is what Jesus was trying to tell us. It's one of the reasons I'm investigating the thoughts that we are of God. Since divinity is in every cell of our bodies, the kingdom is within us, entos in the Greek. Some even say we are divine. I still feel separated from God because of references where God and Jesus say, "I am." We also portray a specific identity, but part of our identity is that divinity that exists. I love that we can be individual and collective. We can be fully human and divine. When considering God as source, I think humans are proceeding from the divine, just like my son is a forehand and is of me. I am of God. If God exists, I am of God, even at the cellular level. I proceed or come forth from God. Now, this does not mean I'm perfect because things get muddied or happen to me. But at the core, at the deepest levels, I am not only connected to the divine, I am of the divine, if God is real. For me, it is a little better way to say we are of God than to say God creates us. Because I have Christian roots, it helps to think about what Paul said when he talked about Christ filling up everything. In Christianity, we get confusing messages about God because we want to classify things so that we can manage them. If God resides somewhere, we imagine we can better manage everything. But even in the Bible, there's an adequate messaging about God always being with us and the promise never to leave us or forsake us. So, in whatever way we imagine God, it's prudent to understand that the divine is present in all things, if God exists. The more we learn from science and physics, the more we know that every cell has intelligence and may even communicate in ways we couldn't have previously only imagined. We find space in every cell and even at the subatomic levels. We see every living organism working for the preservation and thriving of itself. We do not find evil and destruction there. We only find a steady hum of energy that we struggle to identify. I still love my example of sprouts. When I sprout seeds in my kitchen, I get them wet, then they quickly grow into a miniature version of a plant about 3 days later. I'm told that the nutrition for these little plants is concentrated in the tiny seeds, like Broccoli and Friends version, which has broccoli, alfalfa, clover, and radishes. It's delicious and it's packed with nutrition. But the amazing thing to me is that everything the plant needs to grow into a large broccoli plant is inside that tiny seed. The information plans on how to build a broccoli plant are right there. The food to grow to a certain point is all contained in the seed, and later it even knows to draw in sunlight and minerals from the soil until it becomes a full grown plant. Eventually, it returns to the ground where it will be reborn as nutrients and other things. The challenge I have for everyone is this. Let's assume there is a divinity somewhere. Is it somewhere out there orchestrating several hundred seeds in my sprouting jar? Or is it more likely that the divine is in every single cell of every living being and everything like those seeds in my kitchen? Could it be that creation is also evolving and that we are of God more than we are from God, if God exists? I know I just jumped across many boundaries, but the old man in the sky makes little sense anymore. My garden and my sprouting jars teach me more than my theology class ever did. Even the animals I observe in nature teach me about this inner knowing present in all living things. Animals trust their instincts. If they're responding to a drumbeat or a hum in the universe that we still don't understand, we know they follow ancient patterns without having to understand them. They have not been to church, so they don't know to distrust themselves. I know I'm different from my dog and my sprouts. Humans are more complex and have different, distinct instincts, intuition, and information to work with. But this even more convinces me that I am of God and that the divine is within me again, if God exists. My intuition, feelings, and inner knowing are present and flow through me like the hum reverberating through the universe. The fantastic thing about all of this is I've discovered that we can heal ourselves from trauma that has plagued us for most of our life. Those feelings that I was told to ignore are indicators trying to tell me something about how to heal from past experiences. I described this in my book, Being a Journey Towards Presence and Authenticity. I was able to recover from past trauma, but it required me to feel it so that I could heal it. I tried to bypass the pain and pray for miracles for 20 years as a pastor, and the trauma remained. But when I trusted myself and went inside, the trauma got better, and the shadow became integrated with me. Listen again to what Eugene Genlin says. He says, what is split off, not felt, remains the same. When it is felt, it changes. Most people don't know this. They think that by not permitting the feeling of their negative ways, they make themselves good. On the contrary, that keeps these negatives static, the same from year to year. A few moments of feeling it in your body allows it to change. If there is in you something bad, sick, or unsound, let it inwardly be and breathe. That's the only way it can evolve and change into the form it needs. In other words, when we ignore the feelings trying to help us heal, we guarantee that we will stay the same and not get better. But when we are present with the parts of us that are stuck, we experience the real possibility of them shifting. And as Jinlin says, it can evolve and change into the form that it needs. This is where I've found healing in recent years. It has not been from connecting with something out there. It has been from trusting my feelings and being present with those wounded parts of me long enough for them to heal. I also believe all of us are connected and that it matters. Carl Jung thought that we have instincts and that there's a collective unconscious that we all have access to. I will not pretend to understand this fully, but it fascinates me to think about it. He said, the collective unconscious consists of the sum of the instincts and their correlates the archetypes. Just as everybody possesses instincts, so he also possesses a stock of archetypal images. I spent the first half of my life trying to connect with something vague that was out there instead of looking inside. However, I also searched for connections only through physical groups where I could touch, see, and feel people. But now I envision it slightly differently. These days I do focusing sessions with someone, and Laura and I can feel what they are feeling. We observe our instincts as leading in the same direction. We cry together. We are connected. I occasionally think this is when I feel my grandfather and sense something about him is near me. It used to frighten me to think like this, but because I was warned inside religion, this would expose me to dangerous things. But the opposite is actually true. When I am open to the broader world, I feel empowered and like I am evolving into a way of thriving and being that leads me forward in a positive and enlightening way. We are now learning how trees in a forest are connected, and I realize that most communication only happens when I'm open to it. Religion and belief systems teach us to be closed. Our dogma shuts off communication so that one voice tells us what we should think. I now see my life with all communication lines open. I still get to choose what I pursue, listen to, or learn from, but I trust myself increasingly every day to interpret those messages. If God ever did speak to people, then he, she, it still does. If the divine spoke through a donkey, it could communicate through my ancestors and the collective unconscious. If the writers of the Bible were inspired during the 1800-year period when their words were penned, then we can also be moved to capture new and empowering truths today. At some point, we decided everything would be easier to control if we gathered in a building and limited the stream of information to one guy reminding us of what to think. We selected a portion of men's writings and decided to focus on just those communications. Of course, all of this was influenced by our culture, but we chose to ignore that and kept trudging along in our certainty. All the while, mystics of all faiths tried to encourage us that there is more out there, and we mostly didn't listen to them. These days, I'm encouraged by people of all faiths, and I'm open to communication portals to go inside and trust myself. Sometimes these things are challenging to describe, but we find ourselves knowing that we can access something more profound and more ancient than before. Over the past few years, I've been discovering something inside that I call invincible preciousness. I described it in my book, The Tea Shop. Others, like James Fenley from the Center of Action and Contemplation, tell us we can go within and beyond to touch the hurting parts with love. Others might describe this untouched part of ourselves as where our authentic self exists. Personally, what I find inside is something simple yet limitless that connects me to everything good and perfect. My wife, Laura, likes to talk about self-actualization. Maslow identified it at the top of his hierarchy of needs. It's a realization of our potential. We will never be fully human until we discover these missing pieces. Society and religion taught us a form of selflessness, even though Jesus was very self-actualized and very self-aware. Instead of connecting to the collective unconscious, we adopted collective dogma, which kept us static and stagnant with creeds, belief systems, belief statements, and ways of believing and behaving instead of channels of discovery. We limited our holy books to one period and only a few authors. We developed liturgies and practices that were acceptable and cultural. They ignored the imagination and settled for the manageable. We traded mystery, nuance, and wonder for certainty, order, and control. We hosted a conference called subtitle Becoming Fully Human. This is a goal that I am willing to pursue. My friend Kyle Butler says, I don't want to let anything take away from my self-worth and my divinity. Sometimes I feel like an archaeologist removing centuries of debris and discovering things that highlight the magnificent things about humanity and the universality of divinity within us. May we all find this self-worth and self-actualization that leads to eternal and universal things. May I once again learn to trust myself and my own invincible preciousness. As my friends began to live more beautiful lives, I also noticed a presence and authenticity in my life that I didn't embody before. I have tapped into eternal and divine things, and I see this expressed in how I treat others. Living into the reality that I am of God, if God exists, changes the model of fear and control to a life of being and becoming what I have always been. A disclaimer. Sometimes when we go inside, we discover the trauma left, oddly enough, by ignoring what was there. Either we did not understand or we cannot handle it at the time it was inflicted, and our systems taught us to bypass and ignore it. Exploring the catacombs of our inner self reveals the eternal and life-giving truths, and we also encounter the reality of our trauma. As I mentioned earlier, facing this trauma is necessary, but it's also painful. It requires focus, and usually it helps to have a companion along to help us in the process. Even though facing these things is not what we expected and is more challenging than we hoped it would be, it's most definitely worth the effort. Shifting or healing these stuck places releases even more profound understanding and more self-trust.
So, in your portion, you talked a little bit about trauma. So, one question I have for you is how important is it to separate ourselves from the source of trauma in order for us to truly go inside?
Yeah, I'd say it's almost always necessary to separate ourselves from trauma, especially like a ritual, reoccurring thing like religion. You know, the same things are going to keep happening and they're going to be real slow to change. So, not just if you got upset, if you had a breakdown or something, they may respond in the immediate, but not long term. I mean, it's going to take them a long time to change and adapt and start really meeting your needs and addressing your trauma. So they don't understand what. So I would say whether it's a high control family, high control church, somewhere where you've been abused, it's really hard to heal unless you get away from that situation. Or in a couple situation, maybe, if you're both going to therapy, if you're both trying, but if one person's not and you're still being abused, I don't see how you can get better in that environment.
I know that's been.
And then it gets abused especially by churches, that, well, God wants you, God hates divorce, so God wants you in that marriage and your suffering's not in vain and all those kind of things.
Right.
But if God cares about marriage, he's got to, in the church, he's got to care about human suffering.
Right.
And that ritualistic kind of suffering of abuse is not going to get better when your abuser's still there.
A lot of people, like I just remember, and when we were in church, it was almost like your suffering got compared or weighed against Christ's suffering on the cross.
Yeah.
I used to
So
remember that a lot
whatever it is, it's nothing.
compared to,
But I
yeah.
always say my deconstruction started when I heard the bikers
Yeah.
against trafficking
Mm-hmm.
speeches. When they came to our church, and the lady that had been um, pimped out by her dad
Mm-hmm.
really had some strong things to say. But the question she has, why didn't God do anything about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was impossible to get better and heal from that while she's still in that. So,
Right, right. It's amazing the things that we'll bypass. And that was one of the things that so many people in her life had bypassed, you know.
well, it's going to
So,
get better. It's
or, you know, God was there, which is so
it's worse,
twisted.
which is
It's
so
so
much worse.
twisted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, several times in your part, you said, if God exists. And I think that was an important statement to make. So, in that context, though, if you do believe that God exists, it may be easier for us to see ourselves as part of a bigger whole. Like we can see ourselves as part of the bigger whole. But what if you don't believe God exists? Then where can you find your connectedness to the whole?
Yeah. And I think it's my need to have some sort of explanation or something I can refer to as, this is how I see the world now,
Mm,
because I do think there's an intelligence, there's something divine about the whole thing. There's something, that I don't understand. And the thing we're coming to understand is two things we don't know much about is what God is like
mm-hmm,
and the afterlife. We like to pretend like we got all that nailed down, but
mm-hmm.
then when God doesn't come back in 1984 and 85 and all the
Yeah,
times they've,
right.
that we were certain we knew what the
Mm-hmm,
afterlife was like. We knew what God was like. But then when you do introspection, when you start looking at things honestly and asking real questions, it, but then people out of that movement kind of said, well, then we are God. And say, well, I don't know how that jives with me because I'm pretty sure, I'm not I'm not the creator of the universe. I'm not what originated all this, and I don't know what did
mm-hmm,
exactly. But if I say that I'm of God,
mm-hmm,
then whatever that is that's there,
mm-hmm,
I'm a part of that. I'm included in that.
mm-hmm.
And so then but then you start talking about divinity within us,
Mm-hmm.
and people start getting angry and
Yeah.
excluding you from things and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But that's kind of how I'm processing because I heard my friends say, "Well, then we're divine, we're God." And I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, I think we have access to that. I think there's like I mentioned in the video, there's new pathways opening up
Mm-hmm.
to access that. But I think it's better for me to just admit I'm not sure whether there's a God. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know about the afterlife because it's not clear."
Do you think we can still feel connected to the universe? Or I say that because, like in my classroom, we play this card game sometimes during our morning meeting, and it's called Ubuntu, which I think there's like that's an African version of a game that is played in America, I guess, or other parts, other countries, like Spot It. So basically, every card has something on it that I can like that is in common in our card. So it's like, yes, we're all unique, but we all have things in common. So, and that has nothing to do with God or the divine. And so I guess my question is, you know, there are atheists out there,
Mm.
or there are people who deconstruct and then become atheists or agnostics. And so you know, how do we help everyone, whether
Yeah.
you're Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, feel part of the whole?
Yeah, I think you can feel connected. And so take trees and
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms and how they all communicate like that, and they don't consciously understand
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing or who they're communicating with or what they're communicating with, but they just do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the question of can we be connected with something we don't understand?
Mm-hmm.
I think we always have been connected to something we don't understand.
Mhm.
We just pretended to understand it at times, and then the next guy came along and said, well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
But you can still, if you're willing to work on your intuition
Hmm.
and also to deal with your trauma,
Mm.
those two things hinder it a lot.
That's true.
If we go inside and then we find shadows work to be done there, it
Hmm.
sometimes scares us away. That's when we opt for religion or somebody to
Hmm.
tell us what to do.
Right.
So, with intuition and dealing with our trauma, I think we can be connected. But I also think it's important to be honest enough and say, well, if there's a God, then we're kind of God
Hmm.
more than we're from God.
Okay.
Or you could say we emerge from God or
Hmm.
creator or source or whatever. But I'm not as interested in defining it anymore as much as experiencing it.
Mm.
So I don't
Yeah.
have to understand it completely to experience it and to know kind of in here about those
Yeah.
things. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
That makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of reasons that my portion of this chapter in our book may not be exceptionally long. Number one, I said most of what I wanted to say on the topic of this chapter in the last chapter. And number two, Karl did a respectable job of explaining our approach to this part of the journey. I genuinely hope I conveyed the importance of going inside and trusting yourself. It is a concept that is easier said than done. It requires us to be incredibly intentional, and it requires us to find those practices that speak to us in a very personal way. I wish I could give each reader 10 effortless steps to trust yourself, but I can only share what works for me. This is not an exhaustive list, and I continue to look for ways to grow in this area of my life. Thank you for letting me share with you. I hope this can start a conversation of authenticity and sharing where we can each learn from each other. So, how can we go inside? As a mom, the last thing I wanted my children to experience was emotional pain. For me, it was very triggering to think they were experiencing shame or they were somehow feeling not enough. I knew those feelings and I wanted to be the one to save my children from those experiences. In all honesty, however, this is a fundamental part of growing up. When my children came to me with issues of feeling less than, I sat with them and listened to their experiences. I would validate their feelings, even if they triggered me. I learned to do the same thing with my students. Sometimes students come into my classroom with tremendous trauma. They believe things about themselves that are not true, but they have heard someone significant tell them they are stupid or not good enough. No amount of convincing on my part will change that very real message in their life. However, when those heart wrenching situations arise, it is important to treat their feelings as precious. It is essential to give validation and believe them without judgment. This is how we can also treat our inner child. If you are anything like me, you have learned very well how to stuff those feelings, to tell those emotions they are ridiculous, stupid, or better yet, that we just need to get over it already. I do not know about you, but those coping strategies have never worked for me. Ignoring feelings adds to my shame and overall feelings of unworthiness. The very things we would never say to children, friends, or family members in our lives, we tend to scream to our inner child to make them behave. If we know it will not work for others, why do we think it's going to work for us? Taking a better approach is essential. Treating our feelings like precious children is essential. Just as we would sit down and listen to those we love, we need to sit, listen, and validate and believe in our inner selves without judgment and fixing. One thing that I've found to be incredibly important when listening to stories of people on our podcast, The Desert Sanctuary, is to believe them. That may sound simple, but it is amazingly easy to dismiss someone's story when it does not match our reality. When we do not believe people and their stories just because they do not match ours, we halt conversation, create trauma, and project shame. Several times, as I have started sharing my story, people in the church would tell me, "I'm sorry that happened to you, but that wasn't my experience," or "Our church isn't like that." Immediately, I would stop talking. That person in no way validated my trauma and, in a very condescending way, let me know that they did not believe me because their experience did not match mine. This was a practice I had to learn not only to give to people sharing their sacred stories with me, but also to believe and validate my own sacred story. When we are experiencing trauma or anxiety, even after we have left a traumatic situation, that is our body's way of communicating with us. So many times, our anxiety is trying to warn us or tell us something. Let us sit quietly with those feelings, breathe, and listen. Just as we need to believe the stories of others, let us start believing the stories our body is telling us, even if it is anxiety. Be with it and have compassion for it to discover why it feels this way. I like to think of these steps as a slow progression. First, I had to learn to sit with my anxious feelings without judgment. Next, I had to listen, validate, and learn. I still feel like I must intentionally do these things because my go to is to stuff those feelings or shame them away with words like, "What's your deal? Why are you freaking out about this?" I am having these conversations with myself even today. December 31st is my birthday, and it has become a tradition for me to have my granddaughters on my birthday. Since my birthday falls on New Year's Eve, I see it as a beautiful way to bring in the new year. However, I start to feel incredibly anxious whenever I'm going to have my granddaughters after not having them spend the night for a while. My first thought is, what is wrong with me? This should be a happy moment. Why are you so anxious? This can shift my anxiety into a shame spiral if I do not purposefully speak to my anxiety. Listen rather than judge, and see what it is trying to tell me. Just doing that helps reduce those anxious feelings. However, my next step is to trust myself to interpret my intuition and understanding. This sometimes happens, but sometimes it doesn't. I am learning to be okay with the fact that sometimes it does not. I can still thank my body for feeling so deeply about this time I will spend with my granddaughters. I am learning to trust myself even when the answers do not come. This is just a way for me to experience my inner knowing. My experience with church was to deny myself. I could not trust myself because I was wicked, and my heart could not be trusted. Instead, I was programmed to leave critical thinking behind and believe what others told me about myself, even if they didn't know me. Let us be honest about who knows us best. We do. However, our leaders told us that we could not trust ourselves. I hope what I have shared on these pages encourages you to change the way you think about yourself. You are enough. You can trust who you are because you know you. In those moments when you feel like you do not, I hope you reach out to someone who has earned the right to hear your sacred story. I hope you find someone who will listen without judgment and believe you. For me, this has been the path to true healing.
So, in this session, you've compared your relationship with your inner child to your relationship with your granddaughters, maybe even your daughters.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also expressed, at different times in our writing that um, sometimes it's difficult to have the same kind of compassion for your inner child as you would for your granddaughters that are
Mm-hmm.
coming over on the weekend for
Mm-hmm.
your birthday.
Right.
So, first of all, can you talk a little bit more about that and just how and speculate on why that is?
Yeah. So are you meaning like, I guess,
Yeah, so you go inside, like we're talking
right?
about, you discover something about yourself that there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a part of you that
Right.
needs your
Compassion.
compassion,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's harder
Mm-hmm.
when we're working on the inside
Mm-hmm.
than when we're working with of
Hmm.
being like your granddaughter
Hmm.
that is right there. So
Hmm.
why is it harder? And
Yeah.
what do you go through when you're talking about that?
I think just the thing that keeps popping into my head is like I'm constantly with myself, right? Like it's very hard to quiet those voices.
Mhm.
It is a little bit confusing though, because as you're asking me that question, I'm like, yeah, I would never, I mean, if my granddaughters or my daughters came and said something, like I feel worthless, or, somebody told me that I'm no good, I would immediately like jump on that. Like, no, you are,
Yeah.
you're amazing and there's nothing bad in you. Um, and the only thing I can think of is, well, I think part of it is just the way, um, maybe the time in which we were raised, but then also being in church, you just got so much of that messaging
Hmm.
that, you're wretched, you're a sinner, you're not worthy. And it's really hard to get, the longer you're inside of those institutions and hearing those things and believing those things about yourself, I think it is so hard to get that messaging to
Hmm.
just go away.
Hmm. We've been conditioned.
Yeah. And it's really hard to reverse that conditioning. At least that's been my experience. I feel like it's really hard, but I'm almost to a fault not going to let anybody else think that about themselves, because
Mhm.
I know how that feels. And that could be part of it too, if you think about it. Like that, those belief systems, those you aren't worth anything, you are too old to be still dealing with this. Why don't you get over it already? All those like inner critic voices and messaging. Um, like whenever I hear someone, a friend, a family member, granddaughters, daughters, say something similar about themselves, it really does like trigger me almost to where
Mhm.
I'm like, I am not going to allow you to feel how that is making me feel right now,
Right.
or how that made me feel when I was younger.
Yeah.
So I do think part of it is a total defense mechanism. Now, do I wish I could really flip the script on me? Absolutely. That takes a lot more intentionality, if that
Right.
makes any
Right.
sense. I have no problem. I mean, I've told coworkers who get down on themselves, you should speak kindly to yourself,
Mhm.
like, would you say that to somebody, somebody that you love? Would you say that to them?
Right.
Speak to yourself the way, like I can easily say that to other people,
Hmm.
but then to turn that inward is really hard. Like
Yeah.
somehow I still have that concept of, well, I'm just a wretched and I'm not really worthy of talking to myself in a loving manner,
Yeah.
you
People
know?
used to tell me, "Oh, you're so humble." That what they really meant was I was self-degrading.
Mm,
I would say, and it was almost admired that people see you as
yeah,
humble. You're honest about your sins and so on. And so you're almost have been conditioned to live there,
right,
right?
right.
To feel empathy and compassion for other people, maybe to intervene for other people, but then, well, I'm going to have to spend the weekend in introspection. I'm going to have to do some hard work
Hmm.
dealing with this part of myself that's wounded, that's
Right.
not just offended or
Hmm.
whatever, something lighter, but is actually wounded,
Right.
and actually is what keeps reacting
Hmm.
when we do all this.
Hmm.
We've been kind of conditioned
Yeah, for
that that's
sure.
okay, and maybe
Hmm.
even honored to some extent in some circles.
Yeah. And I think I will validate that, I mean, especially as a pastor's wife, if you're up there, being humble, as you said,
Mhm.
yeah, you are praised for it,
Yeah,
you are. You're told
yeah,
what a great, wow, that was a great sermon. And,
yeah,
even though you just like ripped yourself a new one up
yeah.
there, Yeah.
Bypass the real issues
Hmm.
that would take longer, that would take time
Hmm.
to work through.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. That's a question I'm going to ask myself. Is it easier for me just to you know, belittle myself. It takes less work for sure than to sit with myself with compassion. But the second, like, you just gain so much more fruit in your life when you can sit with yourself in that self-compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. So let's look at the lesson 6 action steps. What are those?
Okay, so number 1 is, how did religion cause you not to trust yourself?
That's a good one. So number 2, what are some ways or steps you can take to build trust internally within yourself? Have fun with those, and we'll see you in lesson 7.